Hello, and welcome to the AVFaward webinar number 2. My name is Henry Gordon-Smith, and I am co-founder of the Association for Vertical Farming. As any webinar goes, we have a little bit of technical challenges, and we're just getting started here. So we're going to wait for our viewers to join, and also we're trying to work on Jasper Den Besten to be joining us. With us today, however, we have two employees at Illumitex, our main sponsor for the AVFaward. We have Dennis Reiling, who's our West Coast rep for Illumitex, and Kelly Wilson, our social media maven. Say hi, Dennis and Kelly.
How you doing?
Hey, guys.
So you guys are calling in from the headquarters in Austin?
That
Yes,
is correct.
Okay, great. So yeah, Kelly's our social media maven. She's been leading a lot of the dialogue about the AVFaward on social media. You can follow the conversation by using hashtag AVFaward. Also, during this webinar, we're going to be posting some of the topics we might be discussing in the showcase section of the Google Hangout. An important thing to remember is that you can ask us questions in two ways, okay? So the first way is going to be using the Q&A box in the Google Hangout webinar, which is the preferred way. And we'll be answering your questions about the competition, but mostly today it's going to be about crop selection, what crops you choose for your vertical farm. The second way you can ask questions is by using the hashtag AVFaward and asking the question on Twitter to either Illumitex or the Association for Vertical Farming at @AVerticalFarm. So we're waiting still to get a few of our viewers here. We're having a bit of technical difficulty getting Jasper Den Besten online, but we'll be able to kind of move ahead nonetheless and answer some of your questions. So let's start with Dennis a little bit. Dennis, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do at Illumitex?
Sure. Yeah, I handle all Western region accounts for Illumitex. So all the way from Arizona up to Canada. So pretty much I just work with growers specifically on integrating Illumitex lighting technology and just ensuring that they're successful. Okay,
super. Kelly, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the AVFaward progress so far. We have a really exciting and global response to this competition, right?
Yeah. So we had 300 entries, and so far we have 97 teams into the contest from 24 different. We're so excited the outcome that we've had so far. The site selection photos looked amazing, and I know from the Illumitex standpoint, we're just very excited.
Yeah, I think we're sharing the same feelings here at the Association for Vertical Farming. It's all about sharing ideas about vertical farming and where the best places to do this are. And that's what this competition is all about, is who can choose the best site, the best crops, and the best technologies to set up their vertical farming concept. So that's really the challenge here at hand, and these guidance webinars are really here to inform you and answer your questions about that. So, this next milestone that the teams are going to have to compete on, and we've got some more viewers joining us, so we can begin to get started. Oh, and looks like we might have Jasper Den Besten about to join us here.
Yeah. Finally, Henry, sorry. Oh, my phone.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly a global competition. We've got Jasper calling in from the Netherlands, right, Jasper?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
We're really sorry for the technical challenges, Jasper, but we're just about to get started, so thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Who's in the conversation, Henry?
So on our side, it's me, Henry Gordon-Smith, and then from Illumitex, we have Dennis Reiling, who's joining us, and Kelly Wilson. Kelly handles social media at Illumitex, and Dennis is their West Coast representative.
Okay, pleased to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
So I'm going to introduce Jasper briefly, and then we start diving into some questions about crop selection. So Jasper Den Besten is based in the Netherlands in Den Bosch. He's a professor in new cultivation systems at Haas University of Applied Sciences and has been involved in LED light research since 2009. His focus is on growing without daylight in climate cells of the university and the Brightbox Venlo project, where almost all thinkable vegetable types, herbs, and cresses have successfully been cultivated. as well as a series of potted plants and cut flowers. For the next couple of years of research, he's going in the direction of additional light colors like green and full spectrum, biological fertilizing, and influencing bio-content. Jasper Den Besten is also one of our judges for the AVFaward competition, so it'll be important to kind of hear how he thinks about crop selection and the choices that the teams will make. So Jasper, before we get started, you're actually running an online course about growing without daylight. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think at the moment we are about to start level 4 of 9 levels in this course. And we have something like 30 active participants. Correct. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to take the course, and it's been really educational to hear from the leaders at Haas University, and really fun to kind of answer the challenges, including like what crops we would choose for our vertical farm. So Jasper, I'm going to ask you some questions, and Dennis will follow up with also some answers after you give some answers. And it'll be about crop selection for vertical farms, and then we'll start taking some questions from the audience. And hopefully our audience asks us a lot of questions through Twitter or on the Q&A box in Google Hangouts. So to start with, Jasper, you know, in the traditional, if you can say that, vertical farms, the ones that are operating, what crops are typically being grown?
Yeah, in general, you can say that almost all the leafy vegetables are easy to start with. And if you want to have an even more easier start, you should start with cresses. These cresses have all the energy for germination already in the seed, need little light, many plants per square meter, short cultivation period and all that. And if you want to make it difficult for yourself, try strawberry or a mini tomato, something like that, something that needs pollination. Okay, great.
What about you, Dennis, as you've been visiting some vertical farming installations? What are the kind of crops you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar, leafy greens, a lot of microgreens systems because of quick turnover, and they're very popular with restaurants. So mainly leafy greens as well. Swiss chard, kale is a big one, as well as basil, right? Basil is always a great seller.
Okay, thanks. So I think if we could just turn down the volume on the Illumitex side. There's kind of feedback. So I think the cresses you were talking about, Jasper, is that like a microgreen where you just plant the seeds along the thing and they're going to grow up? You're saying all the energy is embodied within that seed already? And I think in the US we're calling it microgreen, so I want to make sure that our audience is clear. Or is cresses something else?
I'm not sure. It depends on definitions, but it's for instance, broccoli cress is what we call it, and you grow it in approximately a week.
Okay, so yeah, that's similar to what we would call, you know, a sprout or a microgreen in the US. For those of you that are looking online for examples of this, you might want to search, you know, hydroponic microgreens as an example of what such a system would look like. And Jasper, typically when you're growing those microgreens, it's kind of going to be a lot of seed, right? It's a lot more seed than if you're growing a full plant. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. You need so many seeds so that you can make a high yield. And I think in general it's possible to grow, well, I think if you try for the first time and you do not make big mistakes, you can grow easily 200 grams per square meter per day. And if you're a little bit lucky, it will be 300, 400, or even 500 grams. But it's not really growth by means of photosynthesis and light. It's more a redistribution from the content in the seed and add a lot of water. And in a week's time, you're finished.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, there's an obvious pro with growing microgreens because it is easier to grow if you're a novice grower. You know, you need to purchase a lot of seed, but your system itself is not going to be as complicated because you're only growing those crops for a short period of time. what are some of the downsides of choosing microgreens as your crop if you're a vertical farmer, Jasper?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem, especially for starters, is that it's very difficult to get access to top quality seeds, because that's actually what you need. And I think the professionals, we have this Dutch company, Koppert. Yeah, the owner of the company used to be involved in the seed business, so he knows where to get the seeds. Seed quality is the biggest challenge.
Okay, so that's an important factor to think about if you're going to go with microgreens, is what are the costs of those seeds going to be, and where are you going to get high quality seed for your system? I think also an important consideration is that with microgreens, maybe you're going to be spending less time on the growing side and a lot more time marketing, because you have that crop turnaround is happening so quickly, and you're probably in a lot of cases going to be selling it to a more premium customer. What do you think about that, Dennis? Is that an appropriate analysis of microgreens in your opinion?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, the other thing I would say that's really important to me when I look at crop selection is shelf life, right? So microgreens have a lower shelf life, shorter shelf life than, say, kale or Swiss chard. So if you don't have those distribution channels and those marketing channels already figured out before you start growing to sell it to, then you're going to have a lot of product that's going bad. So I mean, when I look at crop selection, I really think marketing is the #1 thing you have to look at. I mean, you can grow any crop, right? It's whether or not you can sell it. So I mean, the majority of annual crops can be grown hydroponically, but you need to have those distribution channels set up before you start growing.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. For selecting any crop. Kelly, do you mind just turning it down a bit? There's a bit of feedback again.
Yep.
Thanks so much. So yeah, I think that's an important point of analyzing the marketplace. Jasper, what are some ways that teams can start investigating what would be the best crops for their market? Should they just visit the supermarket, or are there any other ideas that you have?
No, I think first of all, I agree completely with the comments of Illumitex. Marketing and starting with the market, and actually a product-market combination is very important. It's easy to make the product, and you have to sell it in order to earn money. And I think supermarkets in general, their marketeers, they do an awful lot of courses to buy in the product for low price. And if you compete with starters in vertical farming, then it's an unequal battle. So I think you should look for local market outlets. And what the best outlets are depends on whether you are located in the United States or in Germany or in the country where you are.
Great. So yeah, I mean, Jasper, we've received over 97 finalists out of our 300 entries, and there's 24 different countries represented. So we have a lot of teams from Seoul, South Korea. We have some teams from New York, other parts of the United States. We also have some teams from India, some teams from Belgium, some teams from the Netherlands. So it's really quite a variety, even some teams from Africa and other parts of the world. So it's really quite a variety that we have here. So it's really important that all of you look at your local market and think about, what's the crop you can grow that's going to sell well, and what do people really like to eat there. So we're getting some questions, but we're going to ask a few more and let those questions build up, so keep them coming in. We're going to talk about the leafy greens. So let's start from like the most simple leafy greens you can grow, and maybe you could also describe on the more difficult end what would be kind of the range that we could grow, Jasper, and some details about that.
Yeah, I think in general you can grow any type of leafy vegetable, lettuces, all types of fast-growing kale as well. Sometimes we include herbs in the leafy vegetables, but I will separate them from the leaves that you harvest. And it depends a little bit on what your market is. If you want to sell small leaves, then yeah, you have to harvest early. But the disadvantage is that and in the last week of the cultivation, probably the yield sort of doubles or triples compared to harvesting young plants. In general, you can say that plants have an exponential growth curve, and it takes a long time before the leaves cover the area, start collecting all the light. And if you harvest them at that moment, if you want to produce kilograms, then you're too early. You should wait for another week or perhaps 10 days if that's possible. But in general, I think if you have the right climatical conditions, you can grow any leafy type of vegetable in a vertical farm, no problem.
Super. Now, Dennis, you had a vertical farm at one point on your land, right? What vegetables did you experiment with growing?
I mean, yeah, I grew as much as 67 different varieties of lettuces, which were a great crop to grow because it's a real fast turnover, which is, not only with marketing, but turnover of the crop that really affects, economic viability is an important factor. So the faster you can grow a crop and harvest it and get it to market, then you're going to increase your turnover. So lettuces are great for that. I grew basil, Swiss chard, tatsui, kale, beets, hydroponic beets. So you can grow pretty much any vegetable hydroponically. Some, I grew for fun, and some, depending on the growth rate, weren't as viable as the leafy greens. So it's cool to experiment with different crops to grow. Even carrots, growing carrots hydroponically is definitely interesting. So yeah, I think I like to grow the lettuces and kale. Kale was always a great seller. Everybody loves kale. So.
Okay, super. So now I think a question is, it might be a difficult one to get into too much, but I want to talk a little bit about like what growing systems they're choosing for the crops. So, for example, going back to the microgreens, what's a growing system, meaning the method of cultivation that you might recommend for that, Jasper?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the system that is promoted by AVFaward is quite a nice system. You look for, let's say, a surface that can hold the seeds, but that lets the roots go through to a watering system, and that can be a mist, or it can be a rain system that you turn upside down. That would be the easiest part, or you can even use, let's say, a deep flow system under, as long as you take care of the oxygen level in the water that you use. The problem is that AVFaward has a patent on the system, so probably you're not allowed to use it. But the good thing of patents in the USA is that you can easily Google them and see the details. And I think if you change minor things, you have a new patent if you want.
So that was an explanation a little bit about the kind of aeroponic method being used by AVFaward, AVF member based in Newark, New Jersey, who are opening the world's largest vertical farm. So that's an interesting option as well. I think we're going to post some resources on various types of hydroponic systems on the Facebook page, so watch out there for some of those links, because they do shine with certain crops better than others. But now let's get back to some questions about the crop selection. So we have some questions coming in. I want to keep having them come, so keep sending them in the Q&A box. First, let's start with a question from Charles Ankner. He says, I'm beginning to explore and play with hydroponic potatoes and carrots. What is the future of root food in hydroponics and vertical farming? Jasper, can you tell us about that?
Can you repeat the question, please, Henry?
Sure. Yeah. So the question is about he's exploring using growing potatoes and carrots in a hydroponic system, is his idea. and he's asking what the future is. Is there a future for growing these root vegetables in vertical farms?
I think the root or tuber vegetables are quite hard to grow for two reasons. First of all, if you grow them in soil, in a natural soil, even that is difficult because they require a soil without disturbing layers. If the roots meet a rock, they will circle around, and you don't have straight carrots anymore. So I don't know what the best substrate or a root cultivation system would be for that type of crop. And there's a second problem that I see, that is that these crops do not contain a lot of water, and all the other materials, in total we call that dry matter. You get that if you take out the water of the crop. That has to be made by photosynthesis, and if you want to grow potatoes, they only contain 80% water, something like that, but that means 20% dry matter, and that takes an awful lot of energy from light photons in the photosynthesis. So I calculated that if we do that here in the Netherlands, the production of a kilogram of potato would cost in between 2 and 5 euros. And for 2 euros we can buy 5 kilograms in supermarkets. So that's a long way. It's possible, but it's not easy.
Okay, thanks for that. Dennis, maybe briefly, Charles here is saying that he's playing with a deep water culture system for his root vegetables. What did you try?
So I tried, soilless media like cocoa, and you're just feeding, a nutrient-based solution. So it's technically hydroponics, but not in soil. I have not done that in a deep water culture system, so that would definitely be interesting to see.
Great. So we're going to go back to the questions here. We got some good ones coming in. Let me just get them loaded. Okay, so this question is from Pietro. He says, are there restrictions in crop selection when dealing with pink, he says red/blue LED lights? Are there crops that require a broader spectrum to grow without problems? He's kind of asking what lights he should choose and how the light connects to the crop selection. Jasper?
Yeah, that's a good question. We also struggle with the question whether we should work with monochromatic LEDs in the colors blue, red, and far red, or that we should go for full spectrum lights. There are suppliers that make lamps that imitate daylight, but so far I think the LED colors are more efficient. But there are a few problems. If you want to grow a red lettuce, it's not so easy to have a really deep red color. You have to give relatively a lot of blue. If you have an option for a lower blue wavelength, then that helps better. And maybe you can play a little bit with the night temperature. If you reduce the night temperature, also the color normally gets more intensive. So for colored vegetables and coloration by anthocyanins, you have to play with the wavelength a little bit. And another problem that we face is with tomato and related species like peppers and eggplants. Sometimes under LEDs they suffer from what we call eudema. And that seems to be a general problem. There's something to do with the physiology of the plant, and it also has to do with how susceptible varieties are, especially the mini tomatoes, balcony tomatoes, whatever you like to call them. In general, they do not suffer so much from this physiological disease, but the commercial tomatoes that are grown in greenhouses worldwide, they're quite susceptible, and it's not so easy to prevent this. But it should be very easy, but we did not completely discover how. We still have some varieties that keep getting these symptoms.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jasper. So yeah, I think it's somewhat of a difficult decision on what light color to choose in relation to the plants, and that research is still developing. I invite you to look up Haas University and Jasper Den Besten to see some of the research that's been putting out about that, and also stay tuned for our next webinar with Rebecca Knight of Illumitex, who'll be talking about light selection and which lights you should choose. So we're getting some interesting questions here coming in. You know, vertical farms, typically people think about leafy greens and microgreens, so we've talked about, but we're getting some questions about some different kinds of crops. For those of you who haven't looked at it already, you should check out the introduction to the teams on our Facebook album, where they introduce their sites and their team mission. We have some teams on there who are interested in growing crops like mushrooms, some teams who are going to be growing some fish using aquaponic systems, and even some teams that are going to be growing insects in vertically stacked systems. So this all ties into the broader question of what can be grown in these vertical farms. And from the AVF's perspective, vertical farming isn't just for leafy greens. It's about really reframing how we look at the manufacturing in the city and developing clean manufacturing methods to grow local food. So that could be mushrooms, it could be insects, it could be fish. There's a lot of things that are needed to consume in the city, and vertical farming is really opening up to that. If you're curious about the variety of things you can grow in vertical farms and want to get in-depth information about that, especially insects and mushrooms, you should attend the AVF Summit, which is about vertical farming and the circular economy. It's on June 13th in Amsterdam, and Illumitex and Jasper Den Besten are going to be there, and we're going to have some guests from mushroom growers and insect farms as well. So the question here is, which kind of substrate should I use for growing mushrooms? Is there some kind of substrate in the market? So I'm not an expert on this. I wish our regional manager, Andrew Carter, who grows mushrooms, was here. I can attempt an answer, but I was curious if Dennis or Jasper had some ideas for a substrate for growing mushrooms.
I can answer if you like. Yeah, I will start, and then the others can join me. In the Netherlands, we have a long history for growing mushrooms, but it was always limited to the white mushroom, and that sort of industrial cultivation. And actually, it was done in sort of vertical farms with 5 or 6 layers on top of each other. And we had some lights, but that was more for the people who need to work there, and we could control the climate, especially the humidity, and the CO2 level is very important. And these mushrooms normally produce fruit bodies. I hope that's a good English word, but the mushroom that we consume. And what we do is imitate autumn in a forest, but then in a vertical farm. And these mushrooms are grown on a mix of straw, so the waste material of the production of cereals like wheat in the Netherlands, and horse manure and some other components. And then it's covered with a casing soil, which is a peat-like soil which can keep good structure even if you give a lot of water, and that's what you do. The problem in this cultivation is that it's very difficult to produce your own mushroom compost and put the spores in and let it grow. So we have the industry, and you can buy it in bigger and smaller quantities and get started. On a large scale, it's not profitable, but I'm sure that if you produce local for local, you can get a good price for a fresh product. And another development that we see in the Netherlands is that people start growing other types of mushrooms, but I'm not completely sure about the type. I think it's shiitake and other more Japanese, Chinese mushrooms, and people grow them on waste material of coffee.
Yeah, I've heard about the coffee grounds thing. I know Smallhold in Brooklyn is using something similar, and Back to the Roots in California has used coffee grounds as that substrate. So that's not necessarily a product on the market, but I do know mushroom growers are kind of going to coffee shops and basically getting the wasted coffee grounds that they can then grow mushrooms in, which is really cool. Dennis, any thoughts about growing mushrooms?
Yeah, if I were to do it, I would probably definitely do it in a soil system, a vertical soil system, compost, or the coffee grounds. Pretty much, I would take a waste stream and use that as the media. Fungi are decomposers, right? So, I mean, you see, there's already been in existence for years vertical soil mushroom farms in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. So it's already been done for a long time. Yeah, I would definitely use a soil system to grow mushrooms. Also, I've done a ton of research on growing truffles indoors vertically. So anybody can contact me directly if they're interested in taking that project on.
Wow, that sounds like a profitable business. So thank you for that question about mushrooms, Yuval Meiraz, and we are going to move on to another question. This question is a little bit more about the competition itself. The question is from Suraj Mara. It says, who will actually be running this vertical farm? Is it a government organization or private sector, or this will be a new form of business? So Suraj, the competition really, as far as the business model, it's up to you. You're going to have to explain to the judges why you chose to do, say, a nonprofit vertical farm or a for-profit vertical farm. I think we're leaning to a bit more of the commercial setting, but it is open. And as long as you make your justification about how that business is going to be sustainable and manage itself on its own, then that would be the solution. But there's all kinds of vertical farms going up, mostly on the commercial side. But on the smaller scale, some schools are getting involved in it. So keep that in mind and continue to ask us questions if that didn't answer it for you in regards to the competition. Okay, so we have a question here from Gavin McMahon. He says, I'm a newer grower. I'm curious about algae control. I'm on my third growth cycle with the NFT system, and I'm doing my best to keep the water isolated from the LED light, but I'm still getting algae growth in the roots. So this question's a little bit more on the operation of the hydroponic system, but any quick tips we can offer, Jasper and Dennis, on combating algae in the system?
Yeah, I think that the problem is if you have water, fertilizers, and light, you'll get algae. And I have no idea what you can do to prevent this. We do not use chemicals. We simply clean the system after cultivation and then start again. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We've got Gus Quaid asking a question. What are some easy to grow and nutrient-dense vegetables that you would recommend for our vertical farm? So Gus, at the beginning we talked a little bit about microgreens. I guess we could call them nutrient-dense. I mean, there's a lot of content in there and some studies about antioxidants and benefits from microgreens. But maybe let's talk about some leafy greens that are nutrient-dense. I mean, I've heard some people talk about vertical farmers say, I'm not actually growing vegetables, I'm growing vitamin water, just because leafy greens have so much water in them. So, what's the most nutrient-dense leafy greens that a vertical farmer could grow, Jasper?
I do not have the answer. We are at the starting point of discovering if and how much we can influence the bio content, vitamins, but also iron level, for instance. And in general, I think leafy vegetables contain 95%, 96% water. So we have to carefully check, but they have never been selected for high vitamin content. So a problem with the modern varieties is that the content of most of the things that you research is relatively low, and they are full of resistance genes against funguses and insects. But we don't need them in vertical farms because the system is closed, and if you work hygienically, you do not get a lot of this type of problem. So maybe we should look for old varieties that people say and claim that they had a better taste and were healthier. But I think it's not researched yet.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, Dennis? If maybe the marketability is its nutrient density, what would you choose if the market was saying we want really nutrient-rich leafy greens? What would you grow?
Yeah, I would grow kale, to be honest. Number one, because you're sure to sell it. It's going to sell, and it's known to be a nutrient-dense crop. But I definitely have no scientific data to back that up. But I would say kale.
Okay. So Gus has a follow-up question here. Are we limited to only growing vegetables? What are your thoughts on growing fruits? So Jasper, earlier you mentioned some baby tomatoes. Are baby anything else or any kind of fruits that could be attempted in a vertical farm? What do you think?
Yeah, we tried several fruit vegetables, like we call them. So we tried, how do you say that in English? It's the summer squash type, eggplant, cucumber, tomato, peppers, beans. And if you really want to, everything is possible. But depending on the crop, you have to take care of pollination, and that's a challenge. So if you grow completely self-pollinators, so plants that have flowers that pollinate themselves, then you don't have to do much. So growing French beans or peas, that's really simple, but the market value of these crops is not so high, and you can easily grow them outside. Cucumber is also easy if you choose the varieties that are completely female and produce fruits parthenocarpic, which means that the fruits will grow anyway. You don't need to pollinate them. If you pollinate them, they will contain seeds, and consumers don't want it. And more difficult is, let's say, a strawberry and a tomato, because normally you use bumblebees, for instance, for pollination, and these insects seem to require certain light wavelength that we do not offer in vertical farms. So yeah, you need a little bit of UV, for instance.
Okay, so there's some possibility with growing fruits, but some challenges to consider, like pollination and the range of light and the intensity of that light. So we're getting some more questions in here, but first, Paul DeVries agrees with you, Dennis, that kale happens to be the most nutrient-rich, by the way, he says. So we got a question here. It's a bit of a tough one, but it's about, what about growing hemp for manufacturing? So in the context of the AVFaward competition, we really are trying to encourage you to grow crops for food. We're trying to combat food security and to try and understand how vertical farms can play a role in that. However, if you made the case for a legal crop that was serving a manufacturing purpose or a specific need in your community, that's something that the judges would consider. But again, we're trying to solve some food security issues, and so there's an answer there. So Yuval is asking another question about the distance between LED strips to the crops in the context of leafy greens. I know this is a difficult one sometimes because it really can depend on your goals and your system. But in a basic form, Jasper, what's the distance between, say, the bottom of the plant and where the lights begin, or the top of the plant and where the lights are? I mean, you know better than I how to explain that.
Yeah, the point is, the critical point is that you want an equal light distribution of all the colors of the LEDs that you use. And if you have a high light intensity, suppose you want to give 200 or 250 micromoles per square meter per second, then you will have quite a lot of LEDs, and the distance to the plants can be relatively short. But if you grow these microgreens, as you call them, you don't need a lot of light. So the distance from the lights to the plants should be higher so that the light can spread equally. In general, we have a distance of about 60 centimeters between the top of the pot, if we use pots for growing plants, and the lights. And then the plants will grow up, and at a certain stage they will be close to the light.
Okay, thanks. Dennis, any thoughts on distance between the crops and the LEDs? Rebecca Knight, I'm sure, will talk a bit more about this in her next webinar, but what do you think?
Yeah, I can touch briefly on it. the key is really what crop you're growing, and what the DLI requirement for that crop is. LEDs can be extremely close, but you also want to consider the entire system as a whole versus, are you only growing one crop that may only grow 6 inches tall, or are you going to grow basil that grows over a foot tall? So I always like to keep at least a foot to 2 feet in between levels, so it gives you more versatility to grow different cultivars, different crop varieties. So it really depends. So at Illumitex, what we do specifically is we determine what crops you're growing, and then we design the lighting system and do three-dimensional drawings and photometrics to provide the appropriate amount of light for those crops. So uniformity is extremely important. So we take that into play on how close you can get to the crop. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, and that's why we kind of we do customized light plans for every job, because every system is different, every crop is different. So we want to make sure that we hit the appropriate DLI for proper plant growth.
Okay, super. So contestants out there, if you're concerned about how am I going to learn all this and how am I going to make the right choices, don't worry. Do some research, ask us questions through social media. We'll do our best to answer them. I think what the judges are really looking for is that you've really learned from these lessons and your research, and that your approach is sound. We don't expect you to have every single thing answered perfectly, but if you want to have a great chance at winning this $5,000 first place prize and the trip to Amsterdam, you're going to really have to demonstrate that you've learned and that you can make your case for why your vertical farm is innovative, sustainable, and going to be economically viable. So we got some more questions coming in here. Here from Eric Katz. One of the questions I love is, vertical farming insects okay for this competition? Most definitely, Eric. I think we're still just beginning to understand how to grow insects indoors and your cities, and definitely we have to overcome a lot of the challenges with the consumers wanting to consume insects, whether it's in powder form or some other form. But really that's going to be part of the future of vertical farming and protein consumption as the world develops quickly and we have limited resources. So the answer is yes. There's already a team, Entomon, in the competition, and they have submitted a concept for growing insects in a vertical system. Thanks for that question, Eric. Here's a question from Pietro della Sala. He says, we found projects for hydroponic saffron production. Is this a solution that you would recommend for a part of the vertical farm area to generate income? As we know, saffron can be very profitable, but let's talk about the technical challenges with growing saffron. Any thoughts, Jasper?
I think in general, growing bulbs on a water system is not a problem. In the Netherlands, we have these hyacinth bulbs in the glass in front of your window, and then it will flower and all of that. But yeah, it depends a little bit, because saffron is only a very small part of a complete plant. So what we call the harvest index, the part of the plant that you sell for a commercial price, in grams per square meter is very low. So the market price has to be very high. And I think the product, as far as I know, is only available as a dried product. So then I don't directly see the need to produce it fresh and locally. But if somebody has a market, then of course he can calculate.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment you made there, Jasper. I think when all of you are thinking about choosing your crops, I think we're all very attracted by choosing crops that maybe are different and aren't typically grown in vertical farms. But you have to think about how the crop stores. So we get a lot of questions about, can I grow rice or can I grow corn? And and while those things are technically feasible, technically you could grow anything, those crops store very well. So the marketability of them being fresh isn't as powerful. So unless you can justify why in your specific location there's really a need for that and a need for it being fresh, choosing those crops might not stand the test of time against our stacked level of judges, our stacked team of judges. So watch out for that. And I hope that answers your question about saffron. I think it's good to think about high-value crops that you can add to your vertical farm to diversify your revenue streams and to reduce risk. And that's an example of one that you could try with the right justification. So we have a general competition question coming in here from Charles Anker. He says, I was not aware of the competition or award. Is there still some time to enter? Also, what about trade secrets and patents? Charles, we're sorry, but the entry for the competition this time around is closed. We have over 97 finalists, so the competition is very hot. We're going to be doing this competition again next year. So if you really like it, share news about the competition on social media so that we can really make the case about why we need to keep having this competition to inspire more people to get involved with vertical farming. As far as the question about IP, trade secrets, and patents, we've asked all the competitors not to send in IP-related matters for the sake of their protection. And so they should keep that in mind and try to focus on the conceptual and architectural exercise that we're going through with the award. Thanks for that question, Charles. And he says, see you then. Okay, so see you then next year, Charles. Sounds good. If you're interested in looking at what the AVF Award is about, don't forget to visit our site, award.vertical-farming.net. It's also in our showcase link here in the Google Hangout. There you can look at the timeline for the event, for the award, what prizes are there, and who our judges are. Definitely look at our judges. There's a stacked crew in there, and it's going to be important to know who's going to be reviewing your submissions. Okay, so another question about plants this time from Justin Clifford. Justin says, with growing larger crops, do you have an increased concern of ventilation and airflow between the plants? So this is a little bit about lateral flow of air and ventilation. Jasper, what do you think?
Yeah, when you have a tall crop, ventilation in between the plants is very important because you need it for gas exchange. You need to put new CO2 in the crop, get rid of the oxygen. And also the plants need to get rid of the water they transpire. And at the same time, the speed of the airflow is important. When you see plants moving, then that's sort of a rule of thumb that the wind speed is getting too high. And because if you shake plants, they will get a growth reduction, stay short. So you cannot simply put a complete farm full of plant material. You need space for airflow.
Thanks, Jasper. Dennis, any thoughts on ventilation in vertical farms, especially for leafy greens?
Yeah, I agree with those statements. What I would add would be the other reason airflow is extremely important is to mitigate against pathogens. So powdery mildew. Stagnant air and humid conditions when creating microclimates in between levels, it's very important to have sufficient airflow to aid against pathogens. So that's a big one.
And Jasper, for those teams that might attend some crops that require pollination, ventilation plays a role in that as well?
No, not really, but insects need space to fly from one flower to the other. But we have limited experience with it. What we normally do in the trials, because you want to keep the bumblebees alive and not desorientated because of unnatural light, that often we pollinate by hand with big pencils or something, and sometimes some extra wind speed to spread the pollen. That's also an option.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. So another question here from Yuval. Are there crops that can help each other when integrated into the same area? So this is a little bit about kind of maybe IPM or a bit of a permaculture question. But yeah, are there any companion plantings that can be done in vertical farms that have any benefit? What have you seen, Jasper?
Yeah, that's not an area I'm very interested in. Because the vertical farming system is a sort of full control system. So I don't see why crops should still help each other. But what I do know is that you can have problems with the opposite. There are also crops in some families that produce root exudates. How do you say that? It's chemicals that come from the roots, and they give a competition advantage. So if you put some herbs closely together, normally one of the two grows very well, but not both. So I think the opposite of the question is more important.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point there. So, I mean, I think some of the teams might be doing a little bit of, let's call it low-tech vertical farming. Maybe it could be in the smaller structures or using natural light. I think a lot of the teams are leaning towards the indoor vertical farms, but Yuval here is commenting that they can be outdoor too. And it's true, they can be outdoor. So Yuval, I recommend you look up some permaculture principles, also something called IPM, Integrated Pest Management. Sometimes there's some strategies there about certain plants that can keep pests off, so you won't have to use pesticides. And also, if you look up companion planting, you should be able to find some answers about, you know, what plants to put next to each other in your vertical farm that's outside. And that would be a great justification for your choice. But as Jasper said, typically when you're doing the vertical farm indoors under artificial light, you're trying to control as many variables as possible. So if you have too many of a variety in there, it becomes difficult to understand, okay, is the climate really controlled? You know, what's really resulting in this great crop or this bad crop that we're seeing? I hope that helps answer your question, Yuval. Guillermo, you're asking a question about what kinds of energy do you use. I'm going to need you to be more specific than that. I think for this project, you can think about some renewable strategies for your vertical farm. But keep in mind that if you're using an artificially lit vertical farm, they are quite energy intensive. So those could be a difficult choice there. But you could look at what energy is being used in the city and on the grid, and maybe some decentralized models like cogeneration. Just keep in mind that each of these have a capital investment associated with them, and there's certain risks with that for the business. So we're getting some questions about lights for leafy greens. I think, Gabe, we're going to wait for that question for our next webinar on April 21st with Rebecca Knight, head of R&D at Illumitex, who's going to talk a lot about lighting selection for your crops. So definitely by then you should really have an idea of what you want to grow and why, and then we can answer your questions about the best lights to help you do that. So we're going to be wrapping up here soon. We're almost at an hour. Let's just have some final comments from Dennis and Jasper. Where do you think the future of vertical farming is going, and what do you think are some of the most exciting crops that could be grown in vertical farms in the future? Jasper?
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think you shouldn't ask researchers to answer the question. I think you should ask marketeers and investors. I think they can check this point more clearly than I can. But in general, I think you have to look for product-market combinations that make your system profitable, whatever system, whatever crop, whatever market. But I think that's very important. And if you want to have a cash crop, then maybe it's not food. A kilogram of young orchid plants is far more expensive than the kale that's so popular in the US at the moment. But young orchid plants are not calculated per kilogram, but per plant.
Okay, thanks. Some interesting insight there. What about you, Dennis? What do you think vertical farms will be growing as far as 10 years from now?
10 years, wow, a lot's going to happen in 10 years. That's going to be interesting because I think there's going to be a lot of breeding of cultivars and just a lot of changes genetically over 10 years. But what I'm interested in, I mean, so I'm a little biased because I am a permaculturalist. So with that last question, I definitely see things moving toward, like, yes, we can control the entire environment in a vertical farm, but should we, right? And to what level should we do that? Because I always think about there's going to be a lot of vertical farms that they're going to be small, they're going to be in niche markets, and they need, biodiversity, right? A monoculture, because you have to think in terms of scale, right? So if you're a small scale and you're going to grow a monoculture crop of just lettuce, then the price point you're going to get for that product might not make it economically viable. So when I think of vertical farming, we all have to be thinking about economic viability has to be the goal, or else we're not going to sustain and advance the technology. So when you can control and grow in a permaculture system with companion planting and reducing your inputs, right? We're reducing your nutrient inputs, you're reducing your media inputs, you're reducing your waste stream, you're actually utilizing waste stream for your nutrient cycling. So let's say you're a small vertical farm and you start a CSA and you want that diversity and you want that crop selection where you're going to get higher price points per unit. So I think there's so many scenarios we could just run. I mean, so yeah, it's exciting.
Cool, I really like that. I didn't know you were a permaculturalist, Dennis, so good to have you on board there. I'm just starting to explore permaculture a bit more on my end. So we got another question here, this one through Twitter from Grant Lowe. He says, what do you mean 97 finalists? Do you mean entries? Have people been cut already? So Grant, to answer the question, basically we opened it up to applications and people could just click apply. But the first milestone required was that the teams had to enter in their team name, their team mission, and request that their other team members join. So you couldn't be on a team just on your own. So they had to recruit at least 2 other people to join them, submit their team name and their team mission. So of the 300 entries that we got, 97 of those completed that milestone 1, which is why we're calling them our finalists. And those 97 are in the running for the prize money, and they have the option of providing content through the milestone so that we can promote their work. But at the end, really, they have to submit their final application in May for the judges to review. So we have 97 finalists from 24 countries. And again, you can check out our Facebook album with a snapshot of some of the teams that submitted for milestone 2. Site selection, you can see their team name, a little bit about their mission, and why they chose the site that they did. So thanks for that question, Grant. Okay. Oh, wow. We just got a few more questions in here. So let me see if I can take a couple of these and save the time of our special guests. Okay. Here's a question about choosing crops for educational purpose. Which crops are best for educational purposes? Let's say the team is choosing a kind of education-focused or a school or maybe a community-focused. What would you recommend they grow, Jasper?
Well, maybe without giving a direct answer, I would say crops with a relatively high number of plants per square meter and a short cultivation period. And maybe, if you want to make it more interesting, a crop that does not only make leaves, but perhaps something like a tuber.
Okay, great. Any thoughts on that, Dennis, from a permaculture perspective? What would you put in an education vertical farm?
Well, I think educationally specific, like Jasper said, I would grow something with a very short growth cycle, so you can run multiple experiments and learn quickly, versus a 60-day crop where you're gonna get data after 60 days. So in 7 to 10 days you can get data, and whatever the experiment you're running on media, nutrients, so you can collect and analyze data quickly. So I would do that specifically from an educational perspective.
Cool. So we're going to ask another question here. Justin Clifford says, coming from the Midwest and dealing with livestock and their feed, do you believe a profit can be made from the production of fodder in vertical farming systems? What do you think, Jasper?
Yeah, that depends a little bit on your situation, but I think on YouTube you can find a movie under the title H2O Farm. I think it's part of a BBC program, and it's about a farmer who grows, I think, wheatgrass or something like that. So actually, it's microgreens, but then for cows. And I think if you have limited water and you need to feed the cows anyway, then the combination of putting the water in attractive food is an option. But I have no idea about market prices per kilogram or per ton or whatever. I have no idea.
Sure. Justin, if you're interested, we've recently published an article on agritecture.com about growing fodder in hydroponic systems. You might want to just Google search agritecture hydroponic fodder and see what shows up. We can repost that on the AVF Facebook page if you can't find it there. But it's actually happening across the world that people are using small hydroponic systems to grow fodder, especially in places like India, where they have a lot of small-scale farms. And the small-scale farms are dependent upon they do animal husbandry on these farms, and they're dependent upon kind of large producers of fodder. And those large producers, really are looking for larger accounts. They want to sell as much to a single group at once. So to distribute that to all of these small-scale farmers is difficult for them from a logistics perspective and from a business perspective. So there are some farmers with these small-scale plots who are using stacked vertical systems to grow grass and fodder for their animals. So definitely check that out, and that's an interesting approach, and I think also part of the future of vertical farming. Okay, in the interest of respecting the time of our guests, we are going to wrap up webinar number 2, crop selection. I want to thank you all for viewing today and asking these questions. I want to thank Jasper Den Besten for answering the questions, along with Dennis Reiling from Illumitex. Thanks to both of you. If you're looking to learn more about the competition, you can go to award.vertical-farming.net. You can also explore our Facebook page, the Associated Vertical Farming Facebook page, where there's lots of information on the competition and the results coming from the milestones already. Make sure to mark your calendars, because on Thursday, April 21st, we're going to have a webinar on lighting selection. I'm going to be hosting again, and we're going to have Rebecca Knight, a PhD and Director of R&D at Illumitex, there speaking to you about what lights to choose, and even just what light plants need in general for those of you who are choosing kind of more greenhouse models. So thank you again for your time today. Follow the AVF on Facebook and Twitter. Also, don't forget to check out our key sponsors, Illumitex at illumitex.com. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Thought for Food, and our sponsors, the Globumbus Foundation, which is for entrepreneurs and is based out of Berlin. You can see all those sponsors on our website. Thank you again for your time, and keep getting those good ideas coming, and send any follow-up questions to competition@vertical-farming.net. Thanks again to our guests.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.